Imagine walking into your bathroom tomorrow morning, still half asleep, and catching sight of something in the mirror. A stranger. The person staring back simply isn't you. It can't be you, because you don't exist. Now, imagine trying to explain this to someone. I'm not here, you might say, perfectly calmly, as if discussing the weather. This body? It's empty. I died already. I just forgot to lie down. Now, this isn't some psychological thriller. It's designed to help you unwind, to let your mind drift. But our brain doesn't stop working just because your body is ready for rest. While you're settling in, relaxing, letting go of the day, you'll be absorbing something remarkable. You'll experience what it feels like to truly understand a piece of our universe. So settle in, get comfortable, and let your curiosity carry you wherever tonight's journey leads. This is a real medical condition that has been quietly erasing people from their own minds for centuries. I want to tell you about a woman who woke up one day and discovered she was dead. Not dead in the way you're thinking. Her heart kept beating, her lungs kept breathing, her brain kept thinking. But in every way that mattered to her, she had simply stopped existing. Her doctors had a name for what happened to her. They called it Cotard's delusion, though the people who experience it might argue that calling it a delusion is the real delusion. After all, how can something that doesn't exist be deluded? The medical journals describe it clinically: a rare neuropsychiatric syndrome characterized by nihilistic delusions concerning one's own body or existence. But that's like describing a hurricane as meteorological inconvenience. It doesn't capture the existential terror of losing yourself, while still being perfectly aware that you've lost yourself. Some call it walking corpse syndrome, which sounds like something from a zombie movie but is actually far more disturbing. Zombies at least shamble around with purpose. People with Cotard's delusion often sit perfectly still, convinced they're already buried. This is the story of Mademoiselle X. Not her real name, because in 1880s France, medical privacy meant giving patients letters instead of dignity. But her case would become the foundation for our understanding of what happens when the brain's sense of self simply switches off. She walked into a hospital in Paris, calmly informed her doctors that she was dead, and then spent the next several weeks proving it by refusing to eat. After all, why would you feed a corpse? But the truth is, she wasn't wrong about everything. In a very real sense, the person she had been was gone. The question that haunted her doctors, and should probably haunt you as you're trying to fall asleep tonight, is this: if you can lose your sense of being you, what exactly were you to begin with? Paris, 1880. The Salpêtrière Hospital sits like an ancient fortress on the left bank, its walls containing more mysteries than solutions. Steam rises from the cobblestones, horse-drawn carriages clatter past, and somewhere in those corridors a young woman is about to walk into medical history by insisting she's already walked out of life itself. She arrives on a Tuesday morning, unremarkable in every way except for what she's about to say. 22 years old, well-dressed, articulate, no obvious signs of distress. Her family brought her because she'd been acting strange, calmly, logically strange, which somehow made it worse. The intake nurse asks routine questions: name, age, reason for visit, standard procedure. "I need to see a doctor," the woman says, "because I'm dead." Not, "I feel dead." Not, "I wish I were dead." Just dead. Matter of fact, the way you'd announce you'd caught a cold. The nurse, who's seen her share of unusual cases at Salpêtrière, makes a note and shows her to a waiting room. By evening, she's assigned to Dr. Jules Cotard, a neurologist with a peculiar fascination for the strange territories where the mind loses its way. Cotard sits across from her, studying her face. She looks back at him, with the patience of someone who has all the time in the world, which makes sense when you consider that time stops being relevant after you die. "Tell me about your symptoms," he says. She considers this. "I don't have symptoms, I have a situation. I died sometime last week. I'm not sure exactly when. Tuesday, maybe Wednesday. The details are fuzzy, but my body apparently didn't get the message." Cotard leans forward. "What makes you think you've died?" "Think." She tilts her head. "Doctor, I don't think anything. Thinking requires a brain, and mine is gone. Along with my heart, my stomach, my blood. Everything inside this shell rotted away days ago." She speaks with the casual authority of someone discussing the weather. "But you're speaking to me now," Cotard points out. "Bodies can speak for a while after death, like chickens running around after you cut their heads off. Muscle memory." The logic is airtight, from her perspective. Every question Cotard asks gets answered with the same calm certainty. She's not hearing voices. She's not seeing things that aren't there. She's not paranoid or manic or confused about where she is or what year it is. She's just dead, and she's got the reasoning to prove it. Over the following days, her condition becomes clearer and more disturbing. She stops eating because corpses don't need food. She refuses baths, because what's the point of washing decay? She sits for hours without moving, staring at nothing, because that's what dead people do. Her family visits, begging her to eat something, anything. She looks at them with genuine puzzlement. "You wouldn't force-feed a corpse at a funeral," she says. "Why are you trying to force-feed me?" The strangest part? She's not depressed. Depression usually comes with sadness, hopelessness, emotional pain. She experiences none of that. You can't be sad when you don't exist to feel sadness. She's simply absent from herself. Dr. Cotard has never seen anything like Mademoiselle X, but he's not the first doctor to encounter someone who's convinced they've died while still breathing. Medical literature contains scattered reports going back centuries. Patients who insisted their organs had vanished, their blood had stopped flowing, their souls had departed. Most doctors dismiss these cases as severe melancholia or religious mania. Cotard suspects something deeper is happening, something that challenges everything medicine thinks it knows about self-awareness. He begins documenting her case obsessively. Every conversation, every behaviour, every strange logical loop she uses to explain her non-existence. He notices patterns that other doctors missed. First, she's not delusional about everything. Ask her what year it is, she knows. Ask her where she is, she can tell you. Ask her who the president is, she's got the answer. Her memory works fine. Her reasoning skills are intact. She can solve mathematical problems, discuss literature, debate philosophy. She's only delusional about one thing, herself. Second, the delusion is total. She doesn't think she might be dead or fear she's dying. She knows with absolute certainty that she's already gone. There's no uncertainty, no wavering, no moments of doubt. The part of her brain that generates self-awareness has simply shut down. Third, she's medically deteriorating. Not eating for weeks will kill anyone, dead or alive. But she can't understand why her family keeps worrying about a corpse starving. Corpses don't starve, they just decay. Cotard realizes he's looking at something new. Not madness in the traditional sense, but a complete disconnection between the brain's ability to perceive reality and its ability to perceive the self existing within that reality. He starts calling it délire de négation, the delusion of negation. The condition where people deny their own existence so completely that they become unreachable, even to themselves. But Mademoiselle X isn't alone. As word spreads through medical circles, other doctors begin reporting similar cases. A man in London who insists his internal organs have disappeared. A woman in Berlin who demands to be buried because she's been dead for months. A patient in New York who stops speaking because dead people have no voice. All of them perfectly rational about everything except the fundamental fact of their own existence. Modern neuroscience would eventually discover what Cotard could only guess at. These patients show abnormal activity in the fusiform gyrus, the brain region responsible for recognizing faces, including your own face in a mirror. Their amygdala, which processes emotional responses to what you see, goes quiet. Most tellingly, their default mode network, the brain circuits that maintain your sense of continuous selfhood, shows severe disruption. It's as if the brain's internal mirror, the one that reflects your sense of being you, doesn't just crack, it goes completely dark. Imagine your computer suddenly unable to recognize its own operating system. The hardware still works, the programs still run, but the computer has no awareness that it's the one running them. That's Cotard's delusion, the mind running perfectly except for the small detail of knowing it exists. By 1882, Cotard has collected enough cases to publish his findings, and the medical world responds with a kind of polite skepticism reserved for colleagues who might be losing their minds. But the cases keep coming. There's Henri, a clockmaker from Lyon who arrives at his local hospital with a peculiar complaint. His internal organs have been replaced with machinery. Not metaphorically, literally. He can hear gears grinding where his heart should be, he says. Springs and cogs where his liver used to sit. He's become a broken clock, and broken clocks don't need food or sleep or human contact. Henri spends his days sitting motionless, listening to the mechanical sounds inside his chest that no one else can hear. When doctors press a stethoscope to his ribs, they hear a perfectly normal heartbeat. Henri hears the ticking of a timepiece that's already stopped. Then there's Marie-Claire, a baker's wife from Normandy. She shows up at a morgue in Rouen at 3 a.m, demanding to be prepared for burial. "I've been dead for 6 weeks, she explains to the bewildered mortician. "My family keeps pretending I'm alive, but corpses belong with corpses." She's travelled 200 kilometres to reach this morgue because, she explains, it's the only one large enough to handle her particular type of death. She's decomposing from the inside out. Her organs have liquefied. Her bones are crumbling. Soon there will be nothing left but the smell. The mortician, who's seen actual corpses in various states of decay, notes that Marie-Claire looks perfectly healthy. She disagrees. Health is for the living. But perhaps the most disturbing case comes from Dr. Leidersdorf in Vienna. His patient, a former philosophy professor named Klaus, has developed what he calls existential mathematics. Klaus has calculated, using elaborate formulas, exactly how much of himself disappears each day. "On Monday, I lost my capacity for memory," Klaus explains, writing equations on the asylum walls. "Tuesday, my ability to feel physical sensations vanished. Wednesday, my emotional responses died. By my calculations, I'll be completely non-existent by next Sunday at approximately 3:47 p.m. Klaus treats his own erasure like a scientific experiment. He takes detailed notes on his progressive disappearance, creating charts and graphs that track his journey toward absolute nothingness. The irony, which Klaus can't perceive, is that his meticulous documentation proves he still exists to document it. When Sunday arrives, Klaus sits quietly in his chair, waiting for 3:47 p.m. The moment passes. He checks his pocket watch, confused. According to his calculations, he should have achieved complete non-existence by now. Perhaps, he tells Dr. Leidersdorf, non-existence is like death. You can't actually observe it happening to yourself. These patients share something beyond their delusion of death. They're eerily calm about their condition. When you don't exist, existence becomes someone else's problem. They also share a strange form of logic that's impossible to argue with. Challenge them on any point, and they'll provide reasonable explanations. Their reasoning is perfect. It's just based on the fundamental assumption that they're not there to do the reasoning. Most disturbing of all, they often seek out places associated with death. Graveyards become magnetic. They feel drawn to funeral homes, morgues, anywhere that dead things belong. Some patients have been found sleeping in cemetery mausoleums. The families of these patients face an impossible situation. How do you care for someone who insists they don't exist? How do you feed someone who believes corpses don't eat? How do you love someone who's convinced they're already gone? Many families resort to force-feeding, restraints, desperate attempts to prove their loved one is still alive. But you can't argue someone back into existence. The harder they try, the more convinced the patient becomes that these grieving people are simply unable to accept the obvious truth of their death. Dr. Cotard publishes his complete study in 1884. The delusion of negation, he calls it, though by then other doctors have started calling it Cotard's syndrome. The name sticks, even though Cotard himself finds it slightly embarrassing to have a form of madness named after him. But naming the condition doesn't explain it. What Cotard has discovered raises questions that won't be answered for another century. What exactly is the self? Where does it live in the brain? And how can it simply disappear? Think about it for a moment. Right now, as you're listening to this, you have an absolute certainty that you exist. You don't need to prove it to yourself. It's the most basic fact of your experience. You are you, experiencing being you, aware that you're the one doing the experiencing. But what if that feeling just stopped? The brain would keep working. Your memories would remain intact. You'd still be able to think, reason, solve problems. But the part of you that knows you're the one doing the thinking would go dark. It's like a movie theatre where the film keeps playing, but the audience has vanished. The story continues, but there's no one there to watch it. Modern neuroscience has begun to map the brain circuits that create this sense of self. The default mode network, a collection of brain regions that activate when you're not focused on specific tasks, seems to maintain what scientists call narrative self-awareness. It's the voice in your head that provides running commentary on your life, the sense that you're a continuous person with a past and future. When this network malfunctions, the narrator goes silent. The movie keeps playing, but the voiceover disappears. The fusiform gyrus, tucked away in the temporal lobe, specializes in recognizing faces, including your own. When it stops working properly, you become a stranger to yourself. Literally. The face in the mirror becomes just another face, no more familiar than a random person on the street. The amygdala processes emotional significance. When it goes quiet, nothing feels personally relevant anymore. Your own life becomes as emotionally meaningful as someone else's shopping list. Put these malfunctions together, and you get Cotard's delusion. The brain continues its work, but the person who is supposed to be experiencing that work has simply left the building. But this raises a terrifying question. If your sense of being you can disappear while your brain keeps functioning, what does that say about the nature of consciousness itself? Are you just a story your brain tells itself? A narrative constructed by neural networks that could, theoretically, stop telling that story at any moment? Philosophers have debated the nature of self for millennia. Cotard's patients provide a disturbing answer. The self is more fragile than we ever imagined. It's not some eternal, unchanging essence. It's a biological process, as vulnerable to breakdown as any other function of the brain. And like any biological process, it can be repaired. Mademoiselle X spent 4 months in Salpêtrière Hospital, existing in the strange limbo of being dead while breathing. Her family visited daily, bringing flowers for someone who insisted she couldn't smell them, speaking to someone who maintained she couldn't hear. Then, on a grey Thursday morning in March, something shifted. She woke up and felt different. A subtle change, like a radio slowly finding its frequency. She looked at her hands. They looked like hands again, not the empty vessels she'd been staring at for months. She touched her face. It felt like her face. "I think," she told Dr. Cotard that afternoon, "I might not be dead anymore." Cotard, who had been trying various treatments, everything from cold baths to electrical stimulation, was cautious. "What makes you think that?" "I'm hungry," she said simply. "Dead people don't get hungry." It wasn't a complete recovery. For weeks afterward, she described feeling like she was watching herself from a distance, as if her sense of self was slowly settling back into her body like dust after a windstorm. She remembered her months of being dead, but the memories felt like they belonged to someone else. "It's strange," she told Cotard during one of their final sessions. "I can remember thinking I didn't exist, but I can't remember what it felt like to not exist. It's like trying to remember what it was like before you were born." Her case became the foundation for what we now know about treating Cotard's delusion. Modern patients often respond to antipsychotic medications, which help reconnect the brain circuits that maintain self-awareness. Antidepressants can restore emotional significance to personal experience. In severe cases, electroconvulsive therapy, controlled electrical pulses to the brain, can reset the neural networks that went offline. But perhaps the most effective treatment is simple human persistence. Families who continue caring for their dead, loved ones, doctors who keep talking to patients who insist they can't hear, nurses who keep offering food to people convinced they can't eat. The self, it turns out, is partially constructed by other people's recognition of it. When everyone around you treats you as if you exist, it becomes harder to maintain the delusion that you don't. Dr. Cotard continued studying the condition until his death in 1889. By then, he'd documented over 20 cases, each one adding another piece to the puzzle of human consciousness. His work laid the groundwork for modern neuroscience's understanding of how the brain creates the experience of being someone. Today, Cotard's delusion remains rare. Fewer than 200 cases documented in medical literature over the past century. But each case continues to illuminate something profound about the nature of consciousness itself. The condition reminds us that the feeling of being you, that fundamental sense of existing as a continuous experiencing self, isn't as solid as it seems. It's a construction, a story your brain tells about the data it's processing. And like any story, it can be interrupted. The patients who recover from Cotard's delusion often describe their return to existence as gradual, like watching a photograph slowly develop in chemicals. First, vague shapes appear, then details, finally, recognition. They're the same person who disappeared months earlier, but also somehow different. They've experienced something most of us never will, the complete absence of self while remaining conscious enough to observe that absence. It changes them. How could it not? They tend to be less certain about things that used to seem obvious. They're more aware of the fragility of identity, more grateful for the simple fact of existing. They've been to a place where the self goes dark and somehow found their way back. In her final interview with Dr. Cotard, Mademoiselle X was asked what she'd learned from her experience. "That being someone," she said, "is more complicated than I thought, and more precious." She paused, looking out the window at people walking past on the street below. All those people down there, they take for granted that they exist. They assume they'll wake up tomorrow and still be themselves. But I know now that it's not automatic. Consciousness isn't something you have. It's something you do. And sometimes you stop doing it. She turned back to Cotard. "I'm grateful to be doing it again." Mademoiselle X was discharged from Salpêtrière in April 1881. She married a baker, had 3 children, and lived what by all accounts was an ordinary, unremarkable life. She died in 1923 at the age of 64, surrounded by family who had never stopped believing in her existence, even when she couldn't. Her case file remains in the hospital archives, a testament to one of the strangest journeys in medical history. The trip from existence to non-existence and back again. And somewhere in those yellowing pages lies a reminder that the self you take for granted, the face you see every morning, the awareness that you're the one listening to the story, is both more fragile and more resilient than you ever imagined. The mind, it turns out, is capable of losing itself completely, but it's also capable of finding its way home. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, your brain will begin its own mysterious work. The default mode network will shift into different patterns. Your sense of self will fade into the background as dreams take over. In a way, you'll experience a small version of what Mademoiselle X went through, the temporary dissolution of the conscious self. The next time you catch your reflection unexpectedly, in a shop window, a darkened screen, a bathroom mirror, take a moment to appreciate the small miracle of recognition. That face looking back at you, the immediate knowledge that it's your face, the unquestioned certainty of your own existence. These are gifts more precious than we usually realise. If tonight's story has left you curious about the stranger territories of the human mind, you're in good company. There are more mysteries waiting in the shadows of neuroscience, more cases that challenge everything we think we know about consciousness, identity, and what it means to be human. Consider subscribing if you'd like to explore more of these dark corners together. Leave a comment about which aspect of Cotard's delusion intrigued you most. Until next time, sleep well. And remember, you exist, even when your brain forgets how to prove it.